So what I'm going to do is obviously when you log into Moodle, I think for this particular unit, I will have, I'll put in all the presentations, and I have already created some handouts, which I'm going to just double checking on this, what all is uploaded. Yeah, so basically the LOs are already here.
Okay.
And I'm going to send you, for each LO, I'm going to try and send you a handout as well. So along with the presentation that we go through today, I'm going to try and send you a bit of handout so that you have it with you. And in this particular, there are about 5 learning outcomes. So we'll probably have about 5 or 6 sessions over this. Now, let's start off with this particular unit, which is people's management. Now, one of the key reasons why you study this particular unit in health and social care, though it sounds as if it's a management unit, which is unit 5.3, people management, is because I think this particular sector, you're dealing with a lot of people, whether it's patients, whether it's peers, staff, colleagues within different type of departments, organization. One of the key aspects that a healthcare professional needs to develop is the ability to be able to manage relationships, and also to understand how to deal with people, work within teams. Sometimes if you're working with a managerial position or a supervisory position, how are you able to motivate or keep your staff motivated? And then to a certain extent, because if you're in that management position, then you have to look at how do you get the work done? How do you maintain the productivity which is required of you specifically within this sector, by using techniques of performance appraisals, which is performance and reward management, and also in some cases acting as a coach or a mentor. And these things are predominantly important in this sector is because you have to, because you're working within the public sector in more or less in most cases, and because this is public sector, you need to have the art of managing people by either motivating them, showing leadership, or taking leadership positions, setting an example by doing this, by doing the task, and in some cases create a structure or a type of organization if you manage a department that works effectively when either working alone or in teams. So what I'm going to do is obviously start off, with the first learning outcome. And in the first learning outcome, what we are looking at basically doing is we are understanding how the structure and the culture of the organization actually impacts, how the structure and the culture of people also, how it impacts the working of the organization. So in this particular learning outcome, we are going to be looking at studying different types of structures which are available within an organization, how they are formed, when they are formed, which kind of structure actually works well within what type of organization. And because the type of structure which is formed within the organization, how does it create a culture? And then how does the culture actually impact the working of people within the organization? So this is a very interesting topic. And I think if you've worked previously in any sort of organization, small business, large business, private or public sector, you would definitely see that you have always been a part of a department or a particular, within the role that you've done, you would have been a part of a particular team. And that effectively kind of dictates, what you do, how you do, and, that kind of defines in terms of your working relationships or day-to-day, interaction with your peers and colleagues. Now, you see the screen and is the slide okay? Slide visibility is okay?
Yeah, it's fine. I can see it. It's fine.
Good stuff. So what we are looking at is, let's understand before we get into, getting into this particular unit, let's look at one or two definitions in particular. Now, how do you define, let's put it this way, how do you define organization? What is, according to you, an organization?
Oh.
What will you say, what is organization?
I don't know.
Anything which comes to your mind, just randomly, just any thoughts. So why do we call a business an organization, or why do we call a company an organization? Why not a business? Why not, a company, or maybe, with some other similar name? Why, in what context do we call a business an organization, or a company an organization? So I'll give you a bit of a hint. When you say you're working in a company, that means you're working within an organization, right? When you have more than one person working within the company, working within the a particular setup, then you kind of use the term that you're working in an organization. So essentially, what that would mean is that when you look at the types of companies that we have, just as a brief market knowledge, when you look at, there are different types of company structures. You have sole trader, you have proprietorship, you have limited company, private limited company, private sector company. Now these are types of companies, or the if you have to classify businesses on their types of why they are created and how they are created, we would use this structure. But when you talk about the business, or when you talk about people within that business, you use the word organization, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to organize resources, whether it could be financial resources, people, manpower resources, physical resources, in a particular fashion to be able to work as a coordinated entity or as a business. So in that context, when we talk about businesses or companies, we use the word organization, because what we are trying to do here is we are trying to basically organize the resources to be able to work to achieve a defined objective. And if I have to extrapolate and extend that meaning to what is the meaning of organizational behavior, that means a group of individuals, or the individuals which form up that particular organization, the way they behave and the way they interact or project an image outward, or when they are kind of interacting with each other, tends to show the behavioral pattern of the organization. So when you look at services organization in general, what you do find is most people undergo trainings wherein they are given trainings about customer service, customer referral. They are basically given trainings to understand how to serve customers better, to be able to create a customer delight or bring out the best experience. And the reason why this is done is because they classify themselves as a organization which is geared to provide services, whether it's financial services, healthcare services. Here, people are generally seen to be proactive, more, they show empathy, they are able to relate to situations, they proactively offer or volunteer to help. And that is why these, organizations show a particular type of behavior. That means, everybody in this organization is quite helpful. Everybody in this organization is very nice, or everybody in this organization is all ears. That means they're willing to help you. And that is what kind of defines, or when we extrapolate and extend the definition of organization to a type of behavior which is exhibited by a particular organization, with a set of individuals or group of individuals behaving in a particular manner to be able to achieve the aims and objectives set by the management, would be classified as something called organizational behavior. Is that clear?
I'm really sorry to say this, but my internet kind of
Come again, sorry. Is it coming clearly? Is it?
Yeah, it did, but as you were explaining, it did get a bit cut off. So I don't know if you would be able to run through it again, or maybe you could do it at the end of the session.
Yeah, that's fine. I can run it right now. What we were discussing is we were talking about the definition of organization. When do we use the word organization? So in the context, sometimes you get to see that we use the word company or a business, but in certain cases we use the word organization. So here, to understand this, the reason why we want to look at this, definition of the organization is, I asked you a question in terms of in what context and in which place or a situation would you use the word organization as against a company, a business, or an entity?
And where they're providing a service, or
that is correct. That is correct. What else can you think of?
A business, or an organization like a I'm not sure, like a store, like a shopping. I'm not sure.
You're on the right path. So basically, when you look at talking in terms of innate objects, that means non-living objects, or the type of entity, what you do is you refer to it as a business, that I set up this business, or I'm a part of this organization. And when you say that I set up this business, that means you've set it up physically. But when you say I'm a part of this organization, the key difference it becomes, it kind of shows is that you belong to something which is living. That means it is referring to something which functions, which provides services. And in that case, the context of business or a entity or a setup changes to the meaning of organization. That means you are trying to organize resources, and that those could be people resources, management resources, financial resources, physical resources, and you're trying to manage those resources to be able to achieve a particular objective. And that is why you term or use the term organization. So organization is nothing but the function or the process of trying to organize anything which is given. So if you have, say for example, a couple of things in front of you, like a few letters, or you've got a few few things from the stationery, and you've been asked to organize the table, what you'll do is you'll try and bring them into some sort of an order. And that process of bringing it into some sort of an order is basically nothing but organization. So when you refer to business, when you refer to a particular company or an entity in the form of managing of resources, you use the term organization as against a business entity or a company. Okay? And then when we extrapolate that or extend that definition to organizational behavior, what we are basically leading to the fact is that in this case, when you have a certain set of individuals or certain types of individuals, groups behaving in a particular manner within that setup or within that organization, then constitutes something called an organization behavior. Now, the reason why we looked at this definition and we want to understand is because the whole process of managing people falls within the remit of something called organizational behavior. And that is something that we need to understand. Because if you understand in terms of the culture, the attitude, and also the behavior of the individuals who work within the organization, to a certain extent, you can actually understand how the organization works. And this particular concept is quite important, is because to a certain extent the behavior of the individuals also portrays a type of an organizational structure to people outside the organization. So when you look at private sector, it's a private sector organization or it's a public sector organization, you have a certain sort of a preconceived notion or some sort of a picture which comes to your mind when you say, oh, it's a public sector organization. Sometimes people relate to the fact that because they are working in public sector, their jobs are secure. The people that I normally deal with in the public sector organization, they have a laid back attitude. And the reason why you say that is because from background the type of company it is and the type of people it employs, and because of that the background information, you kind of tend to conclude what kind of an organization structure this organization or this business will have. So organization behavior, and the structure and a culture of organizations are quite closely linked, because an organization essentially is made up of a set of people and they behave in a particular manner. They show some attitude or a kind of an attitude, and because of their behavior and attitude, the organization then portrays a certain kind of culture. When you look at service organizations, I was giving an example of, is that a lot of people or staff which is recruited within that structure to work within the organization, they look at people who are very friendly, they are very chatty. That means they're able to start conversations. They are kind of people who kind of volunteer to take up jobs, and also in terms of they show initiative. And the other thing that you look at in those kind of organizations is they generally have the ability to be able to solve problems. So they are somewhat what we call troubleshooters. That means give them a set of problems, and they will work out with the customer how to troubleshoot that particular problem or come to some sort of a solution. And that kind of an organization, it exhibits a particular type of behavior because of the type of people employed within the organization. And that organization is seen as a service-friendly organization, an organization which is able to extend the functions and the jobs and responsibilities of the individuals which work within to be able to go and help out customers, and that becomes kind of their main job and responsibility. So the reason why we look at that and how do we classify this, what we do is to understand the types of structures which work within the organization. Now, can you think of there are various types of structures. So that I've listed on the slide. There is something called a tall structure, flat structure, product or brand, and a geographical structure. Now there are other types of classifications also available. Now sometimes you define the organization by this particular structure as well, which is things like it has a functional structure, it has a divisional structure, or it has a hierarchical structure, or it has a matrix structure. Now, these classifications are done depending on how big the organization is, how many people does it employ, and to a certain extent, what we also look at is how the arrangement of departments, jobs, roles, and responsibilities are done around the people or for the people who work within that particular setup. So a tall structure, or a hierarchical structure is primarily a structure in which the employees have some sort of a ranking. That means there is a structure wherein if you have a problem, you raise it with your manager. The supervisor is not able to help, then you raise it to a manager. If the manager is not able to solve it or has an answer to it, you raise it to the director or the head of the department. So in this kind of an organization, what you get to see is that there is a level, and these organizations normally exhibit something called a pyramid structure. That means there are lots of workers, and managing those workers are a set of supervisors or managers, and above that there's another layer, and above that there's a smaller layer of people who own or primarily work as head of departments or have larger responsibilities. Now, where do you think you see hierarchical structure in our day-to-day life when you go and visit maybe some outlets or businesses, or when you go out shopping? Can you think of one or two businesses where you see hierarchical organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I can give example of my old retail organization where I worked long ago. Debenhams, they had a very hierarchical organization. That they had like the CEO, and then they'll have the managers, and then they'll have floor managers, and they'll have area managers, and then they'll have workers.
Right. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So if I look at another common example, which we can probably get to see, is if you go shopping to Sainsbury's or Tesco's, if you go to your local GP surgery, or you go to a hospital, what you tend to see is a bit of a hierarchical structure. So that means you go into the reception, as you mentioned, you deal with the person at the reception, get your inquiry in. Once you've done that, they might ask you to see a nurse, and the nurse might ask you to then refer to see a GP. And if the GP is not able to resolve, they might refer you to a consultant. So what you see is a bit of a hierarchy happening in that, wherein if they are not able to solve a problem or answer your query, what they tend to do is refer you to a higher or a senior person or a specialist in this case, who is able to kind of, look at your problem or look at giving you a diagnosis to the problem that you're having. If I pick up a retail environment, what we tend to see is if you go to a Tesco's, normally you get to see people who are working within the shop floor, and if you have any queries, questions, you ask them. If you have a problem which the shop floor, staff cannot resolve, then at that point in time they say, okay, can I see or speak to a manager? And you normally get to see a department manager or a floor manager who's managing that shift at that point in time, and mostly your problems get resolved there. Sometimes, if they don't get resolved, you do see the store director or the general manager of that store also coming down to see, maybe authorize a refund, which is a high value refund and things like that. So what you get to see is this kind of a structure, which is a tall or a hierarchical structure, as we call it, is normally seen in large setups or large businesses. Or in this case, when we say a lot of people which work within the organization, or businesses which have a lot of people working within the setup itself, will have this kind of a structure within the organization. So a retail store like a Tesco store or an H&M or a Next store that you go to, each store has not less than 40-50 employees. correct? And
Yeah.
each employee works at a particular works in a particular job department or a job functions, and they know that okay, I'm responsible for shelving, or I'm responsible for merchandising, I'm responsible for ticketing, I'm responsible for customer complaints. So they have a very specific job function. They carry out very specific jobs. They know where their job starts and where their job ends. They have a day-to-day same responsibility when they come in and work on a daily basis. And to a certain extent, they are not too bothered about what happens after which they've done their job. So they will come in, they'll work a shift for 8 hours. After that, they finish their shift, they go, and whatever is done is done. They just do a bit of a handover to the person who's coming in and taking over from the other, starting a new shift, and that's it, and their job is done. So you get to see something wherein it's a hierarchical structure. There are people who are answerable to their senior colleagues, and then senior colleagues to the management colleague, and the management colleague to the directorial staff, or people who are at the top of the structure. Is that okay? Now, in terms of this particular structure, this has some advantages and some disadvantages. Now, when we look at a hierarchical or a tall structure, what are the advantages? Some of the advantages could be that because you have a very set responsibility, you have good coordination activities. That means you know what your role is, you do not need to be briefed on that role. And once you start your duties, you can start to finish without having any intervention. There is also a bit of uniformity, as they say, because you know what you're doing on a daily basis. It does not change. You do not need any supervision or direct direction from others who are basically, going to be needing to supervise you. Because you know where your job starts and your job ends, or you have some sort of a defined job description, there are also clear channels of communication. There is no ambiguity in your job role. And in this case, what you do tend to see is that most of the job roles that people take in within the organization, they are quite established. That means if somebody is to leave, they will hire somebody back into that role only. They will not be able to deploy somebody from one role to the other. Say, okay, would you be interested in moving from merchandising to, the till role or the sales role? So they will have to recruit specifically for those roles, because they are roles which are critical for the business. And if a replacement needs to be found, it needs to be found so that they do not have other departments or other sides of the business being compromised. Some of the disadvantages being it is bureaucratic. So sometimes you get to see is that when you have colleagues who call in sick or do not come in and work within the retail environment, your floor manager would say, could you also look after this? You sometimes say, I'm not too fussed about it, that's not my job. I'll try and see if I can do it. If not, then you'll have to give it to somebody else. So because they know that their function and their job is this, and it's not directly related, and it's nowhere written in their job description, sometimes one of the disadvantages could be that there is bureaucracy which comes in because the roles are very specific. Sometimes you will see there are long channels of communication, and that could mean that an information going to or coming from the top might go through a stepwise fashion. So the director of the store might send it to the general manager sends it to the department managers, the department manager sends it to the floor manager, and the floor manager on that day briefs the staff who's working within the store. So long channels of communication can happen. And then decision making is slow because of the hierarchy. Sometimes you feel that the staff do not feel wanted, or they feel left out in the organization because there are too many layers or too many tiers within the structure of the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. When the other type of structure that we look at is what we look at is a flat or a matrix structure. Now, as if you see what has been given in this particular figure, what we do see is there's a bit of a hierarchy, but the hierarchy also branches out into further hierarchies. And this kind of a structure you get to see in global organizations, wherein you will see something which is the head office in one location, and the head office then is branched out into regional offices to a certain extent. And these regional offices could be in one location, or it could be one country, or it could be several, cities. So you have a head office, and then you have branch offices. And if I look at a country level kind of a thing, if it's a multinational or a global organization, you see a Marks and Spencer head office here, or you see a PC's PC World and Curry's or a large organization like Next or H&M having a head office in London or outskirts of London in St. Albans. And what you get to see is you have other branch offices in other locations. You have one in Edinburgh, one in, Leeds, and one in maybe Birmingham. And then underneath that, because they have large operation, lots of stores that they service, there are regional offices within the sub-regional offices within the regional office. And those then qualify into, smaller departments or individual stores. So it could be Tesco stores head office, and then you have 3 or 4 regional offices or warehouses from which the the goods and services are serviced into all these stores. And then there are further regional hubs created within northwest of England, Midlands, Yorkshire, and then within that there are individual stores. So here again, what we do get to see, the most important thing is the layers tend to kind of decrease slightly as against the hierarchical or tall structure. And the other thing that we get to see is the span of control becomes wider. That means within a store, there'll be a lot of decision making which will be provided locally by that store director or the general manager. So there is, if I have to extrapolate this structure into healthcare profession, we get to see this structure in the NHS. So you see a head office kind of a structure, which is the main, let's say the CQC, the Quality Care Commission, or the NICE, which is the National Institute of which basically looks at the NHS Act. And underneath that, you have a lot of trusts which manage a lot of separate individual hospitals in various cities. So there are, as of now, 20 such trusts, PCC trust as we call it, PCCT, and these trusts then manage individual hospitals in various locations. So I know of Manchester, for example. You'll have Manchester Infirmary, we have Manchester Wythenshawe, and we have Manchester and Greater Manchester North. So these are the 3 big hospitals under the Pennine, trust within the Northwest. So I have probably about more, hospitals which are under this particular Pennine Trust, but in general in Manchester there are 3. So this could be Pennine Trust, and you have 4 or 5 hospitals here. Similarly, in Birmingham, there could be one central trust which manages all the other large hospitals in, say Walsall, Coventry, or areas which are very close to Birmingham. And that is where you will get to see a structure which is a flat structure. Now, what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages? Now, one of the key things that we see in a flat structure is that you will see this in an organization which is a very large organization. It is, when I say very large, an example that I've taken here is Unilever, but it is basically like an organization which has a lot of brands or a lot of portfolios. Like the NHS, in your case, has and provides lots of services. So it provides services like for mental health care, social health care, other clinical treatments, things like that. So here, the number of services being provided by, the NHS is large. And because the number of services are large enough, they themselves within the service or the department need to have the decision-making capability to be able to function effectively. So here, what you get to see in these type of structures is you will see a particular hospital. It works more or less independently without having to go back for any major decisions apart from, say, budgeting or human resources. But more or less, it's self-contained as far as the working of that particular hospital is concerned. So similarly here, most departments or divisions within a large organization tend to work independently. They have decision-making power, and most of the work gets done within the structure itself. And that is where you get to see, the flat or, I say, matrix organization. The advantages and disadvantages are quite clear. The advantages are because the organizations are kind of self-contained and they have the highest to the lowest decision-making happening within the environment itself. There are shorter forms of communication, decision-making is faster, and in some cases you will see there is more delegation of responsibility to managers, or there is more delegation in terms of decision-making authority available with managers. And the idea there is to cost effectively manage the resources and be highly productive as much as possible to provide these services to customers, patients, whatever it is. Now, the disadvantage could be that because sometimes you have higher delegation of responsibility to managers or frontline managers, you will see that the management has less control on the working of the or day-to-day working of the organization, because the budgeting decisions, the decisions to do how many operations or see how many patients are done by the frontline managers. There is no way that the management can exercise a control on some of these functions. Now, the other thing that you will get to see is because there are, more responsibilities given to managers, sometimes you'd see there are slippages of standards which tend to happen, specifically with the case of NHS or any other business. If a person is having a responsibility of sales, marketing, and say business development, you will see that it's a large enough responsibility in a large organization, and some parts of it might be compromised because one or the other would take more, priority or more preference in terms of the job being done by that individual. So sometimes you see wider areas of responsibility can lead to a bit of inefficiency or unproductiveness within the organization or that with that particular function. And then sometimes, because the consolidation of power or consolidation of responsibility keeps happening at the managerial or a senior managerial level, people generally get demotivated because they do not see themselves as stepping into the manager's role, and there the opportunities for progression sometimes become less, and because of which you do get to see sometimes demotivation happening within employees working within this kind of setup. An example here would be, which I would give, that if you look at public sector organizations like the NHS, let's stick to that also. You get to see that because of austerity measures, the public sector was not given any raise, or they were given raise of only 1% in the last 3 years, and that has something which has been recently lifted only in the last few months. So nurses and doctors, but the basic rate of inflation and the inflation is rising at 2.6%, but they were only approved a raise in wages or salary by about 1%. So here, because they are in the public sector and the jobs are secure, the government took a decision that the public sector will take the cuts and there will be no raises, salary raise for the next 3 years. But this cap was last year done away with, and the Prime Minister agreed that, okay, we will raise public sector salaries by 1%. But there is a demand in the market that because the average rate at which prices are rising, or the RPI index is rising at 2.1, 2.6%, the salaries or the wages should also be increased by that, percentage. But they had to agree to 1%, and sometimes this leads to, discontent or demotivation within the department, within the organization. The third type of structure that we look at is a product or a brand structure. Now, a product or a brand structure means, here what we do get to see, the business is large enough, but the business has to be divided into a structure wherein they are able to run more or less like an independent entity. So when we look at this particular type of structure within the organization, what we do get to use is a term called strategic business unit, SBU, right? Now, when you look at NHS hospital, let's look at NHS as a whole, as a process. But when you look at a particular hospital in a location like Birmingham, Manchester, London, whatever it is, what you get to see is within the hospital, there are different departments. So there is an oncology department, there is a pediatrics department, there's a gynecology department, there is an orthopedics department. And these departments work in their own shell. That means, given a chance, or given that we have to separate these departments will be able to work independently in their own silos. And the reason why this is there is because within each department, you have the same set of individuals who work, but it's the kind of same structure which works within the department. But what you get to see is the people working within that department are specialists. That means they cannot work in any other department. A person who works within the radiology or the, say, oncology department, which looks after cancers and things like that, they are actually a specialist to work within that department. You cannot expect them to work within a gynecology or a pediatrics department, or maybe some other department for that sake. And here, because the structure of the organization, due to the specialities or the speciality function which the staff actually does, cannot be separated, in those cases, what you get to see is a product or a brand structure. That means you have a specialist structure of the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, that is fine. Yeah.
And a simple example of that is Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard, a large company. You look at Dell or an IT company, Microsoft, say for example. You look at these companies; they have lots of businesses, and within those businesses, they have divisions. So there's a printing and imaging group. There's a personal systems group which looks after PCs and servers. There's an enterprise group, and things like that. So these groups are created, or businesses which are called strategic business units (SBU) within the structure are created because they can work independently as a structured business, and each of the business requires their own functions. So say a particular business would require functions of sales, marketing, administration, finance, payroll, whatever it is. And the manufacturing could be separate. It's like an example here would be, if I take an example of a car industry, you see a Nissan car plant here, and if a Nissan car factory is in UK, you will see that there are different factories will produce different models. Some factories might also produce 2 or 3 different types of models of cars, but generally what you'll get to see is that if a company like Nissan produces trucks, cars, and a different type of vehicle, which are all road vehicles, they will typically have different kind of factories which will produce these, and they cannot be combined together under one production. So these factories or these units are perfectly capable of running independently, and there is no overlap which happens because you require the same set of individuals to work within the engineering production department to produce, and they are more or less specialists who work on those. They are specialist engineers who work on those products. So let's go to geographical structure. And a geographical structure, when we look at, is slightly different from the product or brand structure. But here, because the main reason why we look at this structure is that in this case, what we do get to see that the companies create regional offices to better serve their customers, because the demands and the preferences of customers vary according to the geography. Sometimes what you'll get to see is that the organizations organize themselves into a geographical structure as well. And this geographical structure can be seen in most of companies which work across borders. So you look at Tesco's, which works in 12 different countries. They have different types of store layouts, different type of staff, and in some cases, they also have different type of products when they sell within a particular market. So Tesco in China, or a Tesco in India, or a Tesco in UK maybe has the same branding and everything, but some of the products being sold within the stores are entirely specific to that market, and they are produced, manufactured, sold only in those markets because they are meeting the preference of the local customers. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, when we look at, the health profession, sometimes what happens is if you have a specific set of a problem, what they tend to do is you go to a hospital, but they tend to refer you to a different hospital within the same city, right? I can recall a problem wherein if you have a bit of a skin problem, what they tend to do is you go to your nearest GP or your GP surgery. What they'll do is they'll refer to your hospital. The consultant will look at it, but for treatment, they will refer you to a particular hospital within the same city, which is considered to be a specialist in terms of having a resolution for that, or maybe a department for that. So, for example, if they have to refer you to a dermatology department, which is skin-related problems, what they will tend to do is a dermatology department or a cardiology department might not be present in all the hospitals. There will be cases wherein they'll be able to diagnose and do these things, but they will essentially refer you to for a clinical procedure to a particular hospital within the same city, because they see that to be having the right set of facilities to conduct that operation and to provide the after patient care, after clinical operation care, which is required to be given for the patient to recover. So in those cases, what you will see is a bit of a geographical structure within the NHS as well, wherein most of the hospitals, they work alone or they are self-contained entities to be able to provide most of the services. But when it comes to specialist functions, they depend on each other in order to be able to kind of refer patients to the different specialist departments to be able to solve or offer those procedures. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, very brief looking at some of the advantages. Now, One of the disadvantages could be that, sometimes you get to see in the news, like it was there, I think 3 or 4 weeks back, that a lot of patients in Northern Ireland are being referred, or they are preferring to come down to England and Wales to get treatment done, because some of the type of treatments are not available or are being restricted as of now because of austerity in Northern Ireland. Now, you get to see that in Wales, and sometimes patients have to be transferred 50, 60 miles in order to receive a specialist treatment, and customers are not too happy about it, because patients are not too happy about it, because it involves a lot of mobility care, and in some cases it leads to fatality. So there is a disadvantage which is clearly seen, is sometimes you get to see that because the resources are not available, or there is duplication of resources, what they tend to do is they tend to refer you to places which are not easily accessible, or it creates a bit of a conflict wherein the patient wouldn't want to go there, but that will be the only facility which will be able to offer the treatment, even though it is available elsewhere. But because of the long waiting queues, you are referred somewhere else to be able to go and get that treatment. So sometimes geographical structures create a disadvantage wherein it leads to delays, it leads to transference of cases, and it also leads to patients not being happy to be referred to distance locations for getting treatment. But the advantages could be, a couple of them, wherein when we look at a business, not the NHS in this case, you will get to see that geographical structure gives advantages to businesses, because sometimes they're able to use local resources to be able to produce something which will be more cost effective to the local population. So example is a typical example. I'm just making this up right now, which I've just thought of. Like, if you have to look at procuring milk, assuming most retail stores actually sell milk. Now what they do is they work with the cooperative of farmers, and they have local areas from which they collect, the farmers actually collect milk, and then they pass it on to a retailer, and then obviously they have their own manufacturing and processing facilities. Now, if you see that they are closer to the source of the raw material from which they are getting, then you get to see that the price of milk or the price of fuel, let's take a price of fuel in this case. So if you are closer to Aberdeen, or you're closer to Felixstowe, wherein most of the fuel actually lands up in the UK, you will see that the price on the pumps is slightly cheaper there in those locations as compared to when you go inlands, or to, say Edinburgh or Highlands, wherein you will get to see, because of the remote location, the cost of transportation, what tends to be the case is that the prices are slightly higher. So there are advantages on that flip side, is that if you're closer to the source, your advantage is that you have lesser or cheaper price, and sometimes availability or the ease of availability makes it an advantage. Is that okay?
Yeah, something like geographical structure, could that also include something like, where like in the NHS, where obesity is higher, or something is more higher, so that you get more centres or more kind of services in one location than you would in comparison to another? Is that something like a geographical culture?
That will also be the case, that yes, what the NHS is now trying to do is a good example that you've mentioned, is that what it is trying to do is, because there are localized, there is a need for localized care. So what they are trying to do now is develop specialist centers basis the demographics of the population, and they are trying to provide that support in that particular location itself. And in that case, what they tend to do is they spread it around by saying, okay, if it's going to be dealing with obesity, then okay, that's the center, and that is where everything will be directed. So they're trying to create these geographical structures, or let's put it this way, the hospitals which specialize because of the demographics of that area, to be able to kind of better equip them and help them provide those services to the community.
Okay.
An example that you've taken is of the obesity. There are some cases of cardiology being set up, because wherever we see Asian population, because the Asian population has a particular lifestyle in terms of eating food, what they're trying to do is some of the hospitals wherein it has demographics wherein the number of registered patients are from the Asian background, wherein it is seen that you have higher level of or higher susceptibility to diseases like diabetes, heart disease and obesity. what they're trying to do is create those specialist centers in those areas so that the care can be provided regionally and through those specialist centers. So that means, yes, a geographical structure. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one or two slides specifically. Now we have understood the types of structures which are sometimes, what you call, put in place to better provide services, better provide, care to patients, or, in this case, provide, let's say, better pricing and availability, or make the, availability of products easy to be able to get. And this is done primarily because of the structure of the organization. Now, let's look at what are cultures. How does the culture of the organization get formed? Now, culture is defined nothing as maybe a self, sometimes when you get to see that, I know the culture of that, I know the background of that person. We say that or make that statement. Or you normally say, okay, I know that family quite well. Now, what you mean when you say and you make these comments, or sometimes when you say, I know if you have to work within that company, or if you have to work within that organization, there's a very, there's a certain culture about it, or there's a certain thing about it. So sometimes what you get to see, the type of people which work within the organization and the type of structure it has, it also then helps in shaping a type of image or a portrayal that organization can do in terms of its culture. But culture is, so how is culture defined? Culture is defined as, obviously a collective image or a style of the organization. Sometimes you get to see that in engineering organizations or in production organizations, they prefer to take people who have technical background, or they look at, when you look at the NHS, what is the culture of the organization in NHS? Most of the people are, from the medical background. That is the culture of the organization, because the prima facie service which NHS provides is medical care or health care, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what's the culture of the organization? When you talk about, if you have to ask a question, what is the culture of the organization? Culture of the organization would be, you immediately think of, oh, it's a collective of nurses, doctors, healthcare professionals, people who work within that profession and are geared to provide, medical or, medical related services. Isn't it? That's what comes to your mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that is what is culture. It is a collective self-image or a style of the organization, and most of the people who work within that organization or in that particular business share those beliefs, norms, and they understand the working, and that is what constitutes an organizational culture. So an example here would be, when you look at customer orientation and you look at believing, that okay, if I buy something from Apple or if I buy something from Samsung, I am guaranteed more or less that I will get a quality product, a product which I can trust, I can use for a number of years. It's expensive. Expensive not necessarily mean that it will be quality, but you have that perception that if I buy one of their products, it is going to last me for a number of years. It is not going to have any problems. It is a product which is something which is, something which is going to be innovative. So those are things which come to your mind, and those things, why do they come to your mind, or you immediately get a perception of that, is because you know how the organization works, what kind of people it employs, and what kind of services they provide. Okay. Now the other thing is, look at how we kind of now, come to a conclusion that okay, this is the culture. So what you look at is, then you look at signs, you look at certain tangible objects, or things that can give you kind of place and confirm that idea that this is the type of organization, or this is the culture within the organization. So when you go to, say, the NHS, what you look at is everybody is wearing either blue or green clothes. They have some sort of a ID card and things like that. So you immediately get the impression that you're always around, or it is an organization wherein you see handles, for example, at the counters, various things in terms of cleanliness and other things. You get the general idea that okay, this is an environment wherein hygiene, cleanliness, is the dress code, and other things give you that impression that you are within a hospital. You see a sign like a plus sign, you see signs in the green, which is A&E and things like that. You clearly can recognize and correlate to the fact that okay, this is a hospital, isn't it?
Yeah.
So these are visible symbols of understanding the culture within the organization. Now, sometimes when you go into a corporate office, you see a large reception, a lot of flowers outside, a number of steps. You generally get an idea that, okay, we are getting into a very posh environment, and this is a very large business wherein you have, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 receptionists, you have some sort of a touch system, nice seating arrangement, coffee and tea being served. You get a general idea that, okay, this is a large organization, I'm getting into a head office. I'm just giving an example. So the reason why we look at these signs, or we look at these kind of symbols, is because our brain or our body is trying to continuously decipher and understand what kind of people I'm going to deal with, what type of attitude which will I get to face, and how will I deal with the people within that organization, and that kind of tells you the culture. So there are some rules and regulations in the organization, and rules and regulations also kind of dictate a certain type of culture. So when you work within a company, sometimes within this employee handbook, you're not supposed to make phone calls from the office. You'll have certain do's and don'ts which you are not supposed to. Things like don't use emails, official emails, for personal reasons. Sometimes you will see companies do not allow access to Facebook or such social media accounts within the office. And this is a culture which they are trying to portray by giving you the handbook to explain that these are things which are considered normal, these are things which are not considered normal, or these are things which are not allowed. And that is why you have to adhere to those rules and regulations if you are to work within that organization. Timing, for example, you need to be in the office at 9:30, you leave by about 4, or that is the standard working hours. So these things are made, or you're made aware of these things because they tend to set a tone, and that tone or the requirements to work within that role kind of shapes the culture of the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, I've taken in this slide an example of culture at Tesco. So what we say is that, Tesco, do you know what is the tagline of Tesco? What is the brand tagline of Tesco?
Every little helps.
Every little helps. So what they tend to do is, and when you look at ASDA, they kind of always have that jingle wherein one of their employees is always tapping the hip pocket, saying, saving you money every day. So what they tend to do is the vision and mission of the statement of the company, or the statement, has actually been translated into a culture of the organization. So when they kind of, when you do a recall, okay, every little helps. The thing why they've coined this term is because it kind of gives a bit of a reflection of the type of culture which they have in the organization, wherein they say, okay, we are here to help. We work in teams, we enjoy work, but when we try to celebrate, or when we try to come out with offers, what we want to be able to do in our offerings or the products and services that we sell is we want to help our customers buy the same for less, or always buy something for less. So those are very clear things which are reflected in the brand statement of the company, and that is what you get to see in terms of a reflection, whether employee or a staff is wearing a t-shirt and it has a bit of an embroidery thing on it which says every little helps. So it is a constant reminder that what kind of a culture you will get to see within that organization, and what they do is they expand and translate that into meaningful, they try and expand that into meaningful ways of how this can become the overarching objective. So, for example, treat people with respect. There are people who are always ready to help you. If you work at Tesco, you're working in an interesting job, and if you get on and you work within Tesco, there are opportunities that will allow you to progress in your career. Now, so these are things which they kind of highlight. And when you say, every little helps, there are words which they talk about: better, simpler, cheaper. So they want their customers to get a better experience from shopping. They want the shopping experience to be simple, stress-free, and they want the products which the customers buy to be the lowest possible prices than their competitors. And this then shows the culture of the organization. And the culture of the organization then comes out as, okay, different types, but when we study the types of cultures, we'll correlate that to Tesco in a second. But there are 4 different types of cultures. You have a power culture, you have a role culture, you have a task culture, and you have a person culture. And these are defined because what we need to do is, like we have leadership theories, you have autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire, transformational, transactional leadership styles. Similarly, you have a culture style. A power culture is wherein important decisions are made by the owner or the managers or the management of the organization. So when you get to see, when you work in a small business and the managing director expects that all the decision making is to be consolidated at his level or with him, what you get to see is a power culture. Sometimes you will get to see within departments when people work, they do not delegate enough, decision making power to their staff or their managers, and they tend to kind of consolidate everything at their end, and that is what kind of describes power culture. That means the person wants to retain all the decision making capability at with him or at his level. A role culture is where the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. That means if you are a finance manager, you have all the authority to be able to make decisions. If you are working on the shop floor, then you are the person who's able to make any decisions without going back to the general manager or a member of the staff. And this role culture typically encourages more delegation of decision making, and it is more or less a less risk taking culture. That means because the employees are generally quite content with the responsibility that they are given, they take less risk in being in taking decisions which can lead to a loss or kind of a loss of reputation or loss of money. Task culture is where you see there is an emphasis on achieving or completing the job given on that day or on that in that week or in that month. So that means it is more of looking at adhering to deadlines. You see normally a task culture within service organizations. So when you say, for example, have a faulty washing machine and you send it to the company for repairs, they basically have a task culture because you need that washing machine back in a certain day, and the person who's committing that, okay, we'll have this rectified and reinstalled back in 3 days, or we'll give you a replacement, needs to have that culture, because if they cannot resolve that problem in 3 days, that means the company has to incur a cost of giving you a new washing machine. So the task culture emphasizes on the fact that their resources, which are like people, are put in place because they need to provide solutions. They need to be able to solve problems. And this then essentially allows the organization to be more effective and efficient. A person culture is an organization where you get to see there's a focus on from the manager or the top management, and they seem to kind of show and care more about the people which work within the organization, and they value individual skills. So in this case, a person culture will be seen within, say, like our cabinet, for example, the government cabinet. Now, what you get to see is there are different cabinet ministers, different cabinet secretaries, and they do and perform a particular function, and they head that particular department. So here, the Prime Minister is more keen on putting the right person for the right job, because the right person in that right job will be able to create the culture downwards in the department and in the whole organization for it to deliver services. Are you with me on this?
Yep, I am.
Look at that as an accounting, as an organization like an organization of accountants. They will have only accountants as majority, job holders, and most of the accountants are, all geared to kind of provide those services within the organization. So this kind of a culture is normally seen in specialist organizations, or wherein you typically, look at creating a culture wherein it is top driven. That means if you have a boss like this, which does this, that is what kind of reflects in the team or the organization in that case. Now, out of the four, what do you think will be the culture in Tesco as an organization, or any retailer, for sake, as an organization?
Sorry, what was that?
If you understand these four cultures,
yeah,
what would be the the culture in terms of Tesco as an organization?
I think Tesco's would probably be task culture, or even power culture. No, the power culture is for small businesses. I'll say task culture more.
I totally agree with that. In terms of what you've said is correct. It's not entirely correct, but it is definitely correct. If you see stores, it's again, how you look at it. If you look at an individual store, then they would predominantly have a task culture, because The roles are very well defined. People come in, work within the shift. The general manager knows how to maintain the shift. And obviously, there is a task that they come in and do, and they work within the task culture. But if you look at a regional office of Tesco, which manages a lot of stores, so for example, if I look at Birmingham, might have, Midlands, there would be a regional office in Midlands, and they would manage maybe 50 or 60 such Tesco stores. There, the culture will be role-driven and also person-driven, because a regional manager looking after 3 or 4 stores would be responsible for managing HR. Some of them will be managing merchandising, some of them managing finance, payroll, things like that. So in some cases, that will be a role culture because the setup that we are considering is slightly bigger. So if I look at an individual store, task culture, but if I look at, for example, regional stores or a number of stores clubbed together, what we are looking at is more of a role, oblique, person culture within the organization. Because they do not expect people to leave. And the regional manager's job is that, okay, I want my stores to function effectively. And one of the key things that they want to maintain is they do not want a high staff turnover. Isn't it?
Yeah,
So
that's
things do tend to, vary, but obviously, yes, in some cases, you will find in organizations, all the 4 types of cultures may be present. In some cases, 1 or 2, and in some small businesses, you will find maybe a single or a uniform type of, culture which is available. Now, what I'm going to do is obviously send you this particular handout for LO1. And this basically talks about, different types of structures just for from a remit point of view of assignment and the tasks that you're supposed to look at. So it will give you some clues in terms of the types of structure, and so this then can be brought across into your task 1.1 and 1.2 of the assignment.
okay. Yeah,
Is that
that's
okay?
fine.
Good stuff. Any questions on today's session, Sadia?
No, I think I'm happy.
Yeah, good stuff. So I will send this on to you in a couple of seconds just after the session. And what we'll close the session here for today, and we'll meet up, next week again to cover the second LO, which is LO2.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Good stuff. Let me just quickly stop recording. I need to discuss one.